It's time now for our Friday feature Movie Spotlight, where we review some of the latest cinematic releases at the Korean box office and online. And we, of course, do that with the help of our esteemed film critics. First, I have to my right, Jason Bechervaise. Jason, hello.
Hello, Joe.
Yes, hope you've been well. And to my left, we have Marc Raymond with us this week. Marc, hello, it's great to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
Okay, this week's major release is undoubtedly the much-anticipated Marvel sequel, another Marvel sequel, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. But of course, it is without the late Chadwick Boseman, who sadly passed away 2 years ago. Jason, due to that fact, I take it this is somewhat of a different kind of Marvel film. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, it is, and it's not. There's no doubt that the shocking passing of Chadwick Boseman, as you mentioned, has left a huge hole in MCU. I'm not even a fan of the films, but I still remember quite vividly the Sunday morning when his death was announced. A huge outpouring of grief on social networking sites. Ryan Coogler's Black Panther, released in 2018, was such a culturally important film, a seminal feature in the representation of black characters and African culture. And also its rebuke of Trumpism in America, which I personally enjoyed rather much. It's just impossible to replace Boseman. He's very much at the centre of the film. And so wisely, Coogler, who's again directing, and he wrote the script for this new film, his character's death is basically right at the beginning of the film. So it begins on a somewhat somber note, and clearly the emotional core of the film is connected to Boseman's death. Some parallels here, of course, to Furious 7 starring the late Paul Walker. And so we soon kind of get the opening set piece, which seems a bit scaled down compared to some other Avengers movies, and so what happens is there's this threat emerges from the depths of the ocean, and not long we have this we were very much in Marvel territory again. When we have a war brewing between this undersea nation of Talokan and Wakanda, and so you've also got the American government at the fringes, and Martin Freeman's kind of plays a somewhat minimal role here. The film's main protagonist, played by Letitia Wright, she plays Shuri. She's very much at the centre of the film. I think that was a smart decision. She plays the role really well. We've also got Lupita Nyong'o and a few other cast members as well. Tenoch Huerta, he plays the film's central villain Namor, the head of this undersea ocean world.
Right, Marc, I know you're not overly keen on these Marvel films either. In fact, you've only seen a handful, I believe, right? Did you see the first Black Panther?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so did it work for you then, after at least knowing the first film as well?
Yeah, I like this film. It's gotten some mixed reviews so far. There are kind of some positive, some negative, but I was kind of surprised I liked it as much as I did. It does have a bit of a slow opening. Probably related to them having to deal with the death of Chadwick Boseman, his character. So it does take a while to get going, but once the sort of plot kicks in, I thought it was quite good. And one of the things about Ryan Coogler, the director, who'd also directed the original Black Panther, which I also liked, he seems to be the only director who goes into Marvel movies and comes out with his authorship somewhat intact, that it doesn't get completely erased.
Sure.
Because that's the problem with the Marvel films, is that if you take on one of these movies, you kind of have to fit yourself into the whole universe, and you have to, there's not much room for kind of your own expression, it seems, in a lot of these films. But Coogler seems to have been able to keep some of that personality that he has. For example, he begins as like making this independent movie, Fruitvale Station. He makes Creed, which is this kind of reworking of the Rocky kind of franchise. And with these two films, I feel like there still is those that interest in African culture, as I mentioned, and this is really a movie about kind of a post-colonial movie about these. The effects of colonialism on these two different civilizations, and they're kind of clashing in the film, but there's also the question of, well, shouldn't they really be uniting? That's kind of the question of the film, is like, who, should they really be fighting each other? Shouldn't they be, uniting against the powers that have kind of oppressed them? So I found all that thematic material pretty interesting, and all the performances as well, quite good. So It's another effective celebration of African culture like the first film. It is, but it also is also kind of complicates that. It basically says, well, yeah, we have this culture, but then what do we do in this new world? Like, where we have this kind of we have this more prominent position in the world compared to the past, but what do we do now that we're under these threats? How do we negotiate ourselves in the modern kind of world of the film?
Sure. Yeah. Jason, what do you think? As Marc mentioned, some of the reviews have been perhaps not overly enthusiastic, but what do you think?
I didn't like it as much as Marc did, I think. I think partly because in terms of the film's pacing, although, the opening is somewhat subdued, and actually I really like that, and then it kind of gets going, but then it becomes very Marvel-like, and it kind of goes off in all these directions. I wasn't so keen on that. The ending is really strong and really powerful, which is what I expected. Ends in a really powerful way. I had issues with the villain of the film. The villain is just so weak, and that may be an issue of casting, maybe an issue of writing, possibly quite both. But so I didn't like the villain, but I do like the fact that it focuses on these female characters. These black female characters, and it gives them a lot of agency, and so that's one of the film's strengths. And Marc's touched on some of the thematic threads of the film, which are certainly quite interesting. But I'll be completely honest, I found the middle section of the film a bit of a slog.
Interesting. Okay. Would you at least say it's a fitting tribute to Chadwick Boseman?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And that's where the film is at its best. At that beginning and at the end, but in the middle it kind of loses itself. And I think that's been touched on in some of the reviews as well. So I agree with that. And the film's villain for me was somewhat shallow. I don't want to criticize the actor too much because it could be an issue of writing, but I don't think it was the best decision that the director made.
Okay, so a bit split between our panel of critics as well. How do you see it performing in Korea, where Marvel films have enjoyed a lot of success, right, Marc?
It's this kind of established brand now, and it often kind of seems that these are the only movies that will get big audiences out in recent years. I'm not really sure how this one's going to do. I went to see it yesterday. There was, admittedly I didn't go at peak times, but it didn't seem like it was overly full. But we'll see how it does over the weekend. I don't know if their pre-sales are strong or not.
They're decent, 200,000, but that's, it's not kind of the same as the numbers before the pandemic. I mean, part of the problem with Marvel at the moment, it's like that famous coffee brand, it becomes prestigious until you have it on every corner. And with Marvel films, they're just everywhere. And then you've got, they're released every few months. And then on, Disney Plus, you've got all these series. And obviously, you've got these narratives interconnecting, which works really well in films like Endgame. But I think at the moment, for me, there's just too much going on, and there's a danger that it just becomes overwhelming and people just switch off.
Okay, so that was the latest release in the sprawling MCU series, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Next is a local Korean release, and it is the polar opposite, should we say, of our Marvel blockbuster.
Oh, yeah.
It is the latest
I'm not a fan of Marvel.
It is the latest from the prolific auteur Hong Sang-soo. It's called Walk Up, or in Korean, Tap. Marc, can you describe it for us?
Yeah, this is Hong's 28th feature. It's his second this year, and it's his 10th in the last 5 years. So it's not even that unusual that he's putting out 2 a year anymore. It premiered pretty recently in Toronto, the International Film Festival in September. I was able to see it in Busan, where it played last month at the festival there, and now it's getting this release. The plot's pretty familiar if you're a fan of Hong Sang-soo. There's a filmmaker named Byung-soo, who's played by Kwon Hae-hyo, who's making his 8th appearance in a Hong film. So he's become kind of this Hong quasi-surrogate character in a lot of these films. And he visits this building owned by designer Miss Kim, who's played by Lee Hae-young, who's been in his last 3 films, this kind of veteran actress who's made sort of a comeback in Hong's work. And then the film kind of he basically brings his estranged daughter with her, with the hopes that she can kind of work as an apprentice with this designer.
Right.
And then basically the movie kind of splits into multiple parts, which is what we get in a lot of Hong films as well, where he forms a relationship with another woman who's running a restaurant on the second floor of the building, played by Song Sun-mi, who I think is actually the standout performance here. And finally with yet another woman who he ends up living on the top floor of the building with, who's actually played by his real-life wife, the actor Kwon Hae-hyo's real-life wife, Cho Yoon-hee. So the title ends up being pretty appropriate, since the movie is kind of about, the characters, but kind of about the building. Almost everything is at the building. And so and this is something Hong often does, which is he doesn't do any kind of production design. He just finds a location and goes, yeah, I'm going to shoot in this location, and shoots in it. And he takes that almost to an extreme here with this building, just becomes almost the whole kind of location of the film.
Interesting.
And it kind of revolves around.
So it's a character in itself, basically, the building.
Yeah, to a point, yeah.
Jason, as you said, it's his 28th film. It's getting hard to keep up with all of his films from Hong. It's we should call it the Hong Sang-soo universe, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So have you managed to see most of his recent works, and how did this one compare?
Yeah, I have. I'm lucky in that I'm able to get to see all of his films, and I saw his most two recent films in Busan, or through the Busan kind of screening site. And yeah, no, I think Marc is more of a Hong Sang-soo expert than myself, but certainly there are a lot of the characteristics you associate with Hong Sang-soo, certainly in terms of the kind of the architecture of the narrative, a kind of starting and then in a certain place, and then kind of, in terms of the time frame, it kind of we go back, and then it kind of returns to where it began. That's very Hong Sang-soo. The awkward encounters, the intoxicated conversations, and I love where it was shot. It was this building. I actually looked it up. It's this building in Gangnam, and it's not the kind of building you would associate with Gangnam. It's quite cultural. It kind of stands out. It's not one of these kind of dare I say, kind of not particularly interesting looking buildings. Soulless, yeah, absolutely. Not one with a, just two floors. It kind of spreads out all over the place. And I think it kind of mirrored kind of Hong Sang-soo's kind of approach to storytelling, and, walk up and how that's kind of almost like a metaphor for his films. I do find, if you look at his more recent features, I think his films they tend to have a little bit, I don't know if Marc agrees with me here, a little bit more of closure. They seem a bit more optimistic. Perhaps that's reflecting what's going on in his personal life, his reflections on his relationships with his family and those around him. So that's sure. I mean, his films have always been personal, but I think over the last few years I've definitely seen that.
As Jason said, Marc, you've studied Hong's films quite extensively and have written essays about them. How do you view this latest work and Hong's career arc as a whole? How does it fit in there?
Yeah, he's a pretty unique kind of figure in world cinema. It's what not only in Korean cinema, just globally as well. I've actually just read a recent book about Hong by the critic Dennis Lim, who writes about Hong's sixth film, so way back in 2005, a movie called Tale of Cinema, but kind of uses it just to talk about all of Hong's films because there is so much repetition, right? And he kind of says about Hong, he's kind of like the ultimate auteur in the sense that, the films are so similar to each other. But then he kind of points out an interesting thing, which is that ends up being kind of, it becomes almost a bit ironic, because when you watch a Hong film, you start looking for the differences.
Right, well, that's the whole point, isn't it, with repetition? It's like Right Now, Wrong Then, whereas kind of two different films, they're very similar, but as an audience, what Hong Sang-soo is trying to do is get you to think about what you've seen before and how it's different.
Yeah, and that applies to like his whole oeuvre as well, right? Like all the you're kind of like looking for, well, what's different about this film? It seems almost like the same, but is there anything new here? And like I know for this film, for example, I know it's like, he's not zooming in this film, and he almost zooms and there's almost like these zoom shots in all his films, and then this film there isn't one, and you kind of go, okay, why that is. So on my initial watching of the film, it wasn't one of my favorites of his recent stuff. I did find maybe it was just the idea, it was too similar. It didn't seem like there was anything new there. but I've kind of thought about it a bit more, and I like to see it again. I will kind of have a look at it again, and I do like the location, like how that location is used has kind of stayed in my mind a bit more, and so I would, I think it's not top tier, but again, like all of his films, kind of worth a look and interesting in comparison if you are kind of a fan of his work.
Sure, perhaps there are more layers to unearth and worth some multiple viewings. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Jason, Marc, thank you both for your reviews, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.